I think the fear of the unknown is a scary thing for individuals. And if we can have even a short amount of time to work with that patient and that family, I think making that journey less scary is really what hospice is all about. I mean, we grow up knowing that we're going to go to school, you may get married, you're going to have a job, you know, because other people have been there and you've seen it. And so when you get to this last chapter of life, you don't know what to expect. And I think that is the fear that most people have.
If we identify the underlying issues, most of the time it centers around fear and loss of control. And we tell that person, you have control. Our goal is to help you leave this life as comfortably and as peacefully as we can help you do that. You might be familiar with the 5 stages of grief. And you know, you go through the disbelief and the anger and the bargaining and going through those stages at some point, not always sequentially, but they're there. And the job of hospice and the hospice team is to help each individual and their families work through that. Death does not have to be accompanied by a lot of suffering, either physical or emotional suffering, if we're allowed to work with the patient and their family and resolve any issues or conflicts that they might have.
And if we are able to show the patient and the family that yes, you can be comfortable, we can manage your symptoms, they actually have a better quality of life. And so that last chapter of life is spent with family doing things, the grandkids, maybe, you know, finishing some things off their bucket list, because as Mary said, they're not always taking the day to figure out how to breathe, because we've been able to help them get comfortable. Right. So it changes their perspective on what this last section of life is going to look like.
We've talked the first part of this meeting about hospice, about patients who are at the end of life, but there are some individuals who are between acute care and end of life care that really need the benefits of hospice. Or rather hospice in the sense of palliative care, and the distinction is that both are multidisciplinary approaches, patient-centered care. Hospice is centered towards the end of life. Palliative care is working with individuals who are still receiving active medical therapy, but might be having some difficulty with that. And the ideal candidate for palliative care is someone who has a chronic illness that's likely to result in death. And that could be months or a year or more. So palliative care brings in all of the services that a patient might have, with the exception of committing to full hospice. So if there's someone who's in pain, chronic pain, or chronic dyspnea or shortness of breath, or suffering from complications of a chronic illness such as heart failure, then the palliative care program can help that individual and family live better and manage symptoms associated with those illnesses. Typically, the patient enters the doctor's office, has an encounter 15 or 20 minutes, and then they're back home. And there's another month or 2 months that they're living with those symptoms of that illness that might not be ideally addressed because they're not going back to the doctor for another month or so. But what's done in the meantime? What's done for those individuals who have pain that's not being adequately controlled, or uncontrolled nausea or vomiting, or other symptoms that need to be addressed? And that's the ideal place for palliative care, to help individuals with chronic illnesses live better.
And our palliative care program is going to be working with the community physicians so that, again, there's that control. The patient still has their physician, the physician is still managing and providing the treatment plan, and we're that second set of eyes for the physician and to help that patient and family with symptoms that need managing, palliation, and helping them with the emotional side of a serious chronic illness. So it will be a win-win, and the whole goal is to keep these individuals as independent as long as we can, keep them out of the ER with repeated visits, keep them out of repeated hospitalizations, and work with the community physicians and say, oh, we just did an evaluation on so-and-so, here are some recommendations that we think might be very beneficial. And so again, it's a network around surrounding the patient and their family, but in a different trajectory. My mantras is, earlier is better. And I don't think society or individuals realize that they can enter hospice so much earlier, 6 months ahead, and we can do so much more for them, because it's not just the patient's journey, it's the family's journey. And it's probably easier to manage the patient's symptoms, but more difficult to manage the emotional side of losing someone. And so that's where the education for the community, I think, really is our next step. The average length of stay across the nation for all hospices is really only about 30 days, which, and if you look at the United States, that's not very long at all. I think the median length of stay is, anywhere from like 14 to, 22. So that's not very long.
In my mind, hospice care is the ideal model of patient care. It's truly patient-centric care, where the disciplines, social work, nursing, medical director, they're coming together around the patient to make sure that they have what they need. But it's still a very scary word to most, and the response I often get is, well, doc, you're giving up on me. But it's not the same. It's not the same. It means that we have exhausted all reasonable means of controlling this illness, and that anything further is likely to be detrimental. So let's look at another model of care.